At the end of my book, I suggest that religious studies, and I'm a scholar of religion, is in trouble, and wonder, speculate as to whether religious studies has a future. This is a very real question, because if one looks at the rise of religious studies, which started really in the late 1960s and continued thriving until about the 1990s, it is now in decline. Religious studies departments across North America are closing down. In our current educational system, people don't see a future for it. Governments aren't prepared to fund it. And so there is a real question about its future. That's a very practical one. But I would suggest there's also another question about its future, and that is, how does it go about what it's studying and what's its subject matter? One of the problems here, I think, is what I would call the tyranny of theory. And in fact, I've written an article about this in a book by Ulrich van der Heyden that deals with history and religion. And the tyranny of theory is the move away from looking at religions in the real world to theorizing about religions in some sort of speculative way. And I think a lot of religious studies has been taken over by speculation that really has little significance. The people who are involved, who are engaged in it, think it's very important. You've got to be critical in your thinking about religion and things. But the problem is, I think a lot of them don't realize that people really don't know what they're really dealing with in the first place. A lot of students and things want to learn about religion, and what they're taught is theories about religion. What people need to know, first of all, you've got to have a groundwork. People need to know what Buddhism represents, what the Hindu tradition represents, what Islam represents. And we need to present these in such a way that our students understand what a believer feels and thinks and how they understand their own religion. And then later on, one can get onto the criticism. But to teach religion, I believe very strongly that understanding precedes criticism. And unfortunately, I think today, in a lot of religious studies departments, criticism precedes any sort of understanding. So people are taught all the critical theories, but they're not really working with anything. And theory really serves human beings, scholars, to interpret data. And the data has been left out in many instances. So you get lots of speculation about what is and what is not Islam. Is ISIS genuinely Muslim or not? And you can get lots of theories about this, but nobody ever says, what do they really believe? Why do they believe it? And I think we've got to reframe our questions in terms of religion. And in the first instance, when we're teaching religion, we've got to try to understand what people are doing and why they're doing it. Now, quite frankly, I don't know very much about ISIS. I've not seen genuine reports of what they actually really do believe. But if one looks at Osama bin Laden, he was made out to be, in the press at least, a total nut. I mean, this was an extremist who was going around killing people, and he had no reason, and he wasn't a good Muslim, and all sorts of things like this came out. Reading his works, and some of his works were translated into English and are available, he appears as a relatively good Muslim. I mean, not all Muslims are like him, and don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying Muslims are like this and all Muslims agree with him. Many disagreed with him. But on the other hand, he was able to root his actions in Muslim theology. He wasn't a fool. He knew what he was doing. He knew why he was doing it. And what we've got to ask is, why? What was going on? Well, quite simply, bin Laden believed that the Muslim world was under attack by the West. He believed that things like satellite television was projecting into Muslim countries images of women, of pornography, and all sorts of things like this that destroyed piety. And the only way to prevent this was to fight back. He believed in a defensive war on behalf of Islam. Now, one can argue that he was totally wrong, that what he did was evil, and all this sort of thing, and I don't disagree with that. But what one's got to do is begin to understand why he thought these things. Because if you don't understand why people think something and why they act in a particular way, you're not going to understand them at all. And so I think religious studies has moved away from understanding towards critical theories that really ought to be interpreting data. And they're no longer interpreting data, they're theorizing about theories. And if this goes on, I think religious studies is in serious trouble.